it's amazing how far you can fall or how low you can go on a project that will eventually be successful. At one point in the working of it, the writing of it, you can be so low that you think you're an absolute piece of garbage who will never work again. That is, to me, the true crisis of writing that everyone sort of needs to be alert to.
Welcome to the Scriptcake podcast. I am your host, Lavinder Gill, and our guest this week needs no introduction, but I will give him one anyway. If you ever heard of the movies Lethal Weapon, Last Boy Scout, Last Action Hero, The Long Kiss Goodnight, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, Iron Man 3, Nice Guys, The Predator, then you know exactly who our guest is. Welcome to the podcast, Shane Black.
Thanks for the nice intro. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. So jump in whenever you feel like it.
Well, I'm going to jump in off the get-go. I'm going to talk about a movie that I actually loved that you wrote, and I don't know why it didn't become a big hit. It might have been because some dinosaur movie came out the same week, a movie called Last Action Hero.
I was not actually a big, huge fan of Last Action Hero when it came out. It's a thing that I've found. People discover these things. The Monster Squad was a complete bomb, and now seemingly people know about it, and there's even t-shirts and books and things. Last Action Hero was a bomb, and no one liked it, and now I see it cropping up. It's maybe I'm destined to just work on films that show at midnight. That's maybe the case.
I mean, there are probably a couple of dozen movies in my life. I actually remember what theater I was when I saw it, and I was a student at Penn State when I was in downtown State College, and I went out. Everybody went to go see Jurassic Park that weekend. I think that probably had something to do with the fact that it didn't do as great as it normally did, as those Schwarzenegger films did. But my goodness, I loved the movie. I loved how much, how meta it was. And can you tell me the process of writing that? Was that a script for hire, or is that an original script? How did that all come about?
No, that was the first time, if I'm remembering, that my writing partner, David Arnott, and I at the time took on something that wasn't original. That was an actual script written by, I think it was Zach Penn and Adam Leff. I thought those are the two names. And it was popular. It was an idea people loved. And they basically said, we love this, but we're not sure we want to use the first draft. And brought us in. In retrospect, I had regrets because, I think as I would have, the two original screenwriters felt like, wait, we just wrote this thing, and now these quote big shot screenwriters coming in and usurping not just the job but changing the script all around. And so we, in turn, the screenwriters, had the director change everything around. So I think everyone at one point wrote on that film. I think Carrie Fisher did a draft. William Goldman did a draft. They would just toss it at people. Is it done yet? I don't know. But maybe one more draft. Who we got? This guy's a sanitation worker, but we'll get that unique perspective of the sanitation. Let's let it roll through the typewriter once or twice. Everyone had a chance to work on Last Action Hero. What came out, I think, as a result, was sort of a muddled, please everybody and therefore please no one version of the movie. I respect that you really liked it. I just think it's such a mess, but it breaks its own rules. Like it's meta, but then at one point, it's not just that he goes into Jack Slater's world, the kind of movie you'd see if he doesn't just walk into Jack Slater's movie and exist in Jack Slater's world. Jack Slater also lives in movie world where you see all the other characters from other movies passing by. That didn't make any sense to me.
Who came up with the joke where they pull the gangster's finger to set the bomb off? Was that already there?
No, that wasn't there. But it was supposed to be, that was another thing. That whole sequence was supposed to be set up. The idea was that someone took a shot at the Don of the local mob, and they missed him and hit the fat chauffeur named Leo the Fart. What it turns out, and this is based on something that Richard S. Prather once wrote that we had the rights to, it turns out it wasn't an accident. They shot the chauffeur on purpose because he was fat, hugely so, and all the mob would come for his funeral. And they would sneak into the mausoleum the night before, or the embalming room, and stuff him full of dynamite and blow everybody up. But in the movie, they kind of left out the first part.
Yeah, they did.
So all of a sudden, there's just a guy who's dead, and he exploded. Once again, the Pull the Finger was roundly criticized as being crude, kind of pandering and silly and juvenile. And the only thing that made it sophisticated would have been the setup of how it was actually a clever plot to get this big, obese guy to have a funeral. And that was left out. So I watched the movie. I love the visuals. And I just sort of weep for what might have been. Not even that our draft was the best, but what might have been. We still didn't get it. There's a movie out there, a platonic ideal of those characters, those actors in that movie that still exists in its perfect form that we simply didn't catch. So maybe today you would do the same movie and you would do it with, I don't want to say The Rock, but maybe The Rock. It's not a bad idea, is it, to remake that?
All right. Well, I'd like to get my name in the credits somewhere if you decide to do that. Okay.
Be in the damn thing. I don't care. It's
So let's digress. I didn't realize you were from Pennsylvania. I live in Pennsylvania. I live on the other side of the state from where you grew up.
Yeah, you're in Philly. I was in Pittsburgh.
That's right. And then you moved out to California, I guess, around high school time. When did writing take hold for you? When was it something that became an option?
Well, it was an accident. I went to UCLA to be a journalist. Didn't really do my homework because we didn't declare a major. I got accepted. I went to school and found out they didn't have a journalism major. So I said, oh, well, let's see what else. I met a friend in the theater department and oddly started working in a comedy world. I had a roommate who was a comedian. I would go to the Comedy Store and hang out there. Uniquely screwed up bunch of people. It was sort of a nasty world, but it was also insanely sort of alive and thriving at that time. I would go to the Comedy Store West and watch Jay Leno when he still rode up on a motorcycle and did his 10-minute bit. Just a great time in the 80s for comedy. Hanging around those people, I had a roommate named Ed Solomon. He's written Men in Black. He's written Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure with his partner, Chris Matheson. He's written any number of things. And he's currently done great work with Steven Soderbergh. And Ed works with him. The work is astonishing. Ed's a great writer. Back then, Ed was doing a show called Laverne and Shirley. And we all thought he was God because, oh my God, he gets paid by people in television, to do this. He helped my friend Fred Decker get a job. Fred Decker, of course, The Monster Squad, Night of the Creeps. And Fred helped me. And I was foolishly trying to be an actor at the time. I just, acting had its allure, still does. The problem is there are so many people who could do it better than me. It's hard to have a voice when you're just struggling to get to a baseline that so many people other than you sort of effortlessly exist at and achieve. I had to struggle just to get to be as good as an average actor. Writing gives a voice to someone, for better or worse, it's a little easier to be slightly unique, I think. You can do something and say, well, especially if I hadn't had a lot of training as an actor, but I have read books. I've been a reader since I was a kid. I was sort of the outcast. I was a misfit, sort of Aspergerian. And I think you know this, the tragedy of screenwriters who see movies but don't really read that many books. They'll read one now and again. I don't have to, who has the time, or they'll read a magazine or the internet. And my advantage coming into writing instead of acting was that I could do it slightly differently, and maybe even better, because I'd read thousands of books, or at least 1,000. I had an instant advantage, a sort of built-in vernacular that sort of hopped the line a little bit based on all these paradigms and scenes in my head. And it's like comedy, because in comedy, the good ones, they not only know the original joke, they know the spin on the original joke, okay, that's the joke, but if you twist it, this is, and then they know how to put the hat on the hat, the twist on the twist, because the original joke they heard so long ago, and they've done it so much since then that they're busy twisting things. They don't have to start at the bottom. They don't have to start with that original first joke. And similarly, I think if you just read and read and read, and you take that, you start at a baseline that's significantly higher, that's way more advanced than someone coming in and just saying, hey, I see a lot of movies, I think I'll do that.
Yeah.
So Fred Decker helped me get an agent, and I helped someone else get an agent. And this group of us, this whole big gang that we called the Pad, because we all lived in the same house off and on for years. But the Pad had some wonderful members, by the way. You had Ryan Rowe and Jim Hertzfeld. He wrote Meet the Parents, and Ed Solomon and Chris Matheson, and who else was there? David Fincher would come by, and David Silverman, who directed the Simpsons movies, lived there. Just so many. I'm leaving people out. David Arnott, my writing partner, and he was an actor. Everyone succeeded who walked through that house.
Wow.
For some reason. It was a magic place in the middle of West Los Angeles. And if you were driving by at 2 a.m, inevitably there's a sign, a neon sign that just showed up from a bar somewhere that said open 24 hours. And it was in the window. And if the sign was lit, didn't matter what time it was, you could stop by. Someone's up watching a movie, playing a game, arguing over a movie, doing a video, making a little video, or even making a movie at 3 a.m, setting up lights and doing things, making tiny little projects. That was the Pad.
Wow.
And it was a magical place at that time for me. And for so many, I think. Oh, Robert Renault. I forgot Robert was there too. He wrote Action Jackson and Demolition Man. You know, just back in the day, it was high cotton, those adventure movies from the 80s, and 80s comedies, which today would probably be viewed as juvenile or even offensive. But back then, you know, we ate it all up, just soaked in that zeitgeist of the 80s and 90s.
Okay, so you're saying your writing comes from that head start you had from all the reading, plus the combination of the time and space you were in? Absolutely.
I have wonderful friends who didn't start out as, hey, let's all get together and be in the business. We were just buddies. We were friends before it ever occurred to us to be a part of, you know, Hollywood, except in some kind of, you know, pipe dream. Together, there was no jealousy. We would, you know, if I look at Fred Decker, for instance, hey, Fred, that bit you did, I like that. Can I use that in my script? And he'd go, yeah, take it. Wow. There was none of this, I'll sue you. You know, none of that. There was none of the contentiousness or pettiness or possessive quality. It was all just, yeah, man, we're all in this together. Who cares? Let's just do this. That attitude came from the fact that we were friends first, screenwriters second, because it all just came on us unexpectedly. And it was a blessing that to this day, I think none of us really deserved. We're just blessed to have that house and be all together.
That's amazing. And so then when you're in your early 20s, I guess you write Lethal Weapon. How does that come about? What inspires that?
I always loved mysteries. I always loved cop stories. And for years, I've been steeped in police procedurals, particularly those of a writer named Evan Hunter, who went by the name Ed McBain when he wrote cop stories. And I read the 87th Precinct novels of Ed McBain. I read Ross McDonald, Raymond Chandler. Those were my heroes. That's who I cut my teeth on. At the same time, you've got the cinematic sort of over-the-top version of Dirty Harry and Magnum Force, which immediately, I watched Dirty Harry, it was like a revelation. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. And it introduced me to the concept of the set piece, bits within the movie that are memorable by themselves as, oh, the something scene from Dirty Harry, where he's being bounced from phone to phone at one point on a ransom. The scene where he walks down the street chewing a hot dog with his 44 Magnum in one hand, or 357, whichever it was. And the guy, he says to the guy, I forgot how many bullets are in this gun, basically. I can't remember. Did I fire 4 shots or did I fire 5? And he basically challenges the guys, you know, to reach for a gun. He says, well, do you, punk? And the guy backs. It's a great fucking scene. It's just everything you want. Similarly, the school bus scene at the end, where he actually intercepts a school bus with a psychopath and a busload of children. Every scene in that movie is a set piece. It's something you remember. It's something you could carve out. And people did. There were prints of Dirty Harry where they were incomplete because people would remove that part. They would take the scene, when there's not much good material. And so for Lethal Weapon, I said, okay, how about a police procedural, but with the concept in my mind that it has to have these set pieces. It has to be at a level where it's not just something that every scene you've seen before. It's just, procedural, asking questions and arresting people. No, this has to be a combination of a thriller, an adventure thriller, and a solid piece of police work. And that was the idea. Also, it's a Western, urban Western. Read a lot of those too. So the old gunslinger who's neglected, that was in Lethal Weapon. The guy who everyone brands as being too violent for now today's gentrified age. He's a dinosaur, a relic, a baby killer from Vietnam. Everyone ignores him. He sits and watches TV in his trailer, and people just say, "Don't go near the crazy guy." Mm-hmm. He thinks the war is still on or something. He thinks that he's still acting like there's evil in the world, but we all know in our safe suburban bubble that we're actually coddled and protected, and nothing bad is going to happen. And then something does. And they have to go to the Frankenstein. They say, "Hey, excuse me, we hated you and called you baby killer and thought you were weird. But now we realize you were right. Evil never sleeps, and we need you." And they take Frankenstein out of his cage and set him loose. And he's the old gunslinger resurrected in the gentrified West that doesn't realize they still need the old gunslinger. So everything was a perfect storm for that. All the Westerns I'd read, all the police stories I'd read, it was great, fun.
Now, while you were writing that, were you aware of all these things happening, or did that realization come later?
No, the blessing of writing, and I think you know this, and you've probably said to your students, is most of the time you don't know what you're doing until afterwards. You went, "Oh my God, there's a scene there where, guy walks in with a gun, and the moment someone raises their voice, there's an explosion." And that mimics the fact that when I was a kid in a house, if you raised your voice, something bad would happen. The world would end if you did this or this. All those psychological things start surfacing in scenes in ways that you never even imagined. Yeah. You're just writing an adventure scene, but you're looking back, you could see these psychological elements struggling to emerge and, pop and boil from the mix.
Yeah, no, when my kids watch a movie that I've written or directed or something, they'll always come to me and go, "What was it about?" And then I'll explain, "Oh, that was about when my mother passed away," or "That was about this situation in my life," or "That was about..." I don't know that you're always cognizant of that when you're writing it. Okay. No. So
I agree with you.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'll go back and I'll look at scenes and I go, "Oh, this is what it was about." There have been a couple of times where I'm directing a scene, and then as we're directing it, it just all like comes into focus and hits me like, "Oh, this is why I wrote this movie. This is what this is all about." You think it's about this while you're writing it, but it's actually about something maybe a little deeper.
Would you agree that the best ideas don't come to you as part of a structured process where you just look and choose an idea? It comes out of the subconscious. You're not even aware, to the point where I think sometimes if you're stuck and you just go to sleep or take a break or take a walk, mm-hmm. an idea will appear because it's in there. It's just not consciously perceived yet. Your mind is trying to circle around and unravel this. Sometimes it just takes a good night's sleep.
Yeah, one of the things that I talk to my students about, my advanced students, is trying to find doorways. And what I mean is like doorways into your subconscious. How could you find something that will allow you to connect to something deeper within yourself to actually get, the heart of what you're trying to say out? And so it's not an easy thing to do, but you're right. A lot of times it happens in the shower, cutting the grass, going for a walk, when your body is actively doing something, but your mind is free because all that stuff the body is doing is on autopilot. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It makes total sense. I mean, it's sort of the idea of the subconscious dictating what we do. Is a lot of times when you talk about ideas, you sort of know it when you see it. You can't just think of it, but one idea, even seemingly counterintuitive, will occur to you, and it will strike something. It will resonate. You go, "Oh," because that's the one your subconscious resonates with. It was trying to get to that one. Stephen King is a big fan of The Walk. For instance, I think I read somewhere he would talk about just pick a place like a mile away. So you walk there and walk back. It's a 2-mile walk. It's a half an hour. And just say to yourself, not let's cringe and squint our eyes and tense up. try to think of something. No, let's take a walk and just say to yourself when you start, somewhere between now and the end of this walk, I'll have an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And then just walk. And your brain knows, oh, he wants to have an idea. And as much as you try to stay in the moment, your brain's going to wander. Sometimes at the same time, you're kicking yourself for not being creative and for this is never going to work. The idea is right there.
Yeah.
Even as you're thinking about it, you're still feeling bad that you're doing a bad job of writing, even as you're thinking about the idea, because you're kicking yourself, but your mind is beyond that part, the self-sabotage and the kicking. Your mind actually has things it wants to show you.
There was a time, probably about 18, 19 years ago, where I worked 3 hours away from where we lived. And I would drive there on a Monday and drive home on a Thursday night.
Okay.
And one time, for whatever reason, I didn't turn the radio on. I was just kind of thinking about something.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I knew, I was home. And I didn't remember the trip because
Yeah.
I was so kind of, and I was working on stories and I didn't know it at the time. And so now whenever I have a long drive by myself, I don't put audiobook on or radio or satellite. I just turn it off because I know that's one of my doorways where I can just sit there and process and work on things. So the one that's come to me recently is floating. Have you ever gone floating?
Oh, you mean in an isolation tank?
Yes.
No, I have. The better way is to, for some reason, I like driving or walking. I have to be moving.
Okay. Yeah.
Stillness. Even when I'm a pacer, when I'm writing, I can't sit and think. I just walk back and forth and wear holes in the carpet. It has to be that way for me.
Right.
And I'll realize that I'm walking back and forth and didn't even know I was doing it until I realized I'm just bouncing wall to wall. And that means I'm thinking. The tragedy of it is that you can't force yourself to make your mind wander. You can't say, now it's time, go mind. You have to think, I'll never do it. And then, and while you're saying, I'm such a loser, your mind just starts wandering. You don't even realize it's doing, like your drive. If you say, on this drive, I'm not even going to remember the drive. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to be offsware. It doesn't work, but it just happens, right? Yeah. You have to set up situations for that wonderful sort of getting lost and drifting in your own thoughts to happen. You have to encourage it, but you can't force that to happen.
No, absolutely. So while I was doing a little bit of research on you, I found out that one of my heroes apparently is one of your mentors. William Goldman is one of your mentors?
Yes. There were two people I credit with being mentors, essentially. William Goldman, James L. Brooks, and Walter Hill to some extent. Those three men were pretty much the go-to. And I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with James Brooks and some time with William Goldman. He lives in New York. I recommend every student, I'm sure you do too, reads William Goldman's first screenwriting book, Adventures in the Screen Trade. Mm-hmm. And it's the one with a sort of red and black cover. There's another one with a blue cover called Which Lie Did I Tell? But it's also Adventures in the Screen Trade. It's not as good as the first one. The first one with the black and red cover, it just tells you everything you need to know, not specifically like a Sid Fields thing. It's not about exactly detail-wise how to write or how to present your. It's about the principles of it and the excitement of it, and it makes you want to write. I've always thought, and maybe you agree as a teacher, you can't really tell someone off the bat how to write, but you could give them examples of the excitement of writing and when it tends to happen and what it looks like when something really is special. And you can make them want to do it. And they'll find it if they want to do it enough. So you got to kindle them. You have to make them avid, acolytes in a way of the screenwriting idea. Mm-hmm. And that's what William Goldman does so well. And Jim Brooks, who is fascinated by people. Walking down the street, he'll suddenly just see a little detail of life. And it will just so fascinate him. That to me is the key, is just to really be interested in not just telling a story that makes sense, but finding little moments where it pops and you go, wait, you don't see that often in movies. What I saw was just a little flare of some little detail or some little reaction or some little character thing that really felt like it took life at that moment. It sprang to life and it ignites and you see, oh, this movie is lively. It feels like it's just poking at the hornet's nest of life, trying to get a reaction that feels real, feels lifelike. where the characters suddenly become more than just sort of paradigms on a page, and you really feel like you know them. James Brooks is, I think, possibly the best guy at that. He's the one who did broadcast news. He did
As good as it gets.
And of course, Terms of Endearment was his big
Yeah.
Academy Award winning sensation.
Also worked in television, right?
He started out, yeah. First thing I saw, he wrote a TV movie called Thursday's Game with Bob Newhart and Gene Wilder. I didn't even know it was him. I was a kid, but I loved it. He wrote Starting Over with Burt Reynolds and Joe Clayburgh. It was, and gradually he went to TV, and it was the Mary Tyler Moore Show and Taxi. What's the common denominator? It's the people. It's these quirky characters that you just fall in love with, and all you have to do is say, yeah, it's like Jim from Taxi, or it's like Lou Grant from Mary Tyler Moore. Everyone knows what you're saying who has ever seen the show. So he's an amazing man.
Wow. So let me fast forward to one of my favorite movies of yours. I think in the early 2000s, you made a movie called Kiss Kiss Bang Bang.
Yes,
that's the first movie you directed.
Yes, that's right.
So can you just tell me about what inspired that particular story and how that thing got going?
Well, there was a lot of happy accidents. I sat down despondent. I sort of slid off the map. I hadn't really done anything since my previous writing job in 1994 was The Long Kiss Goodnight, or 95. And so here it is, 2000. 5 years have gone by, a lifetime in the screenwriting community, and nothing. So I sat down and I plunked away at keys, still nothing. But I had a couple scenes, and I took them to Jim Brooks, who was gracious enough to lend me an office space to work in, just to get away from home. Still drudgery. But gradually, I started to piece together this thing. I wanted to do something that was like what Jim did. I wanted to do a people story, and much in the same way that La La Land was about, I wanted to do a Hollywood story. Problem was, individual scenes, they were coming out of my subconscious, but they weren't linking up. It was just a mess. And at one point, I had some really good scenes, but Jim said to me, look, this is directionless. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm reading it, but it starts over like 5 times. It's kind of dark and cruel at times, inappropriately so. It's just, I don't know where you're going with this, man. And of course, first I'm crushed. My mentor is initially excited about what I've got, and then I write about 50 pages. He goes, no, you're not getting it. So I go home, and I had 2 choices at that point. I could curl up. My mind kicked in at that point, my survival mind, and said, no, don't future trip. Don't panic. What do we do? And another voice said, look, you're trying to fly before you can walk. You're writing this sort of boisterous romantic comedy. It's not working. You've got good scenes, but what do you need to do to make this work? And the voice said, you got to put a murder in it, and you've got to make it a mystery, and then you can write it, can't you? And I said, yeah. And I even said to Jim, I said, I'm not going to entirely start over, but I'm adding a detective and a murder, and I think that'll do it. And from then on, I could write it, because I went back to what I knew instead of trying to emulate someone whose work I so admired, but it wasn't entirely my wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. The good news is, because it started as a romantic comedy, the finished sort of thriller mystery, I think, is informed by some stuff that you wouldn't normally find in that kind of movie. I think the romantic comedy part that took me so long and struggled with comes through. Mm-hmm. That's the good news. The bad news is there were so many false starts. It's like 1.5 years of brooding, giving up, a lot of scuffing shoes and walking in lonely roads and ruminating and crying and all that. Just feeling like a fraud and a failure, as we so often do, until it happens and you go, oh, that's pretty good. It always seems impossible until it suddenly isn't. It always seems like you're a fraud until someone says, change the scene. You go, hey, no, that's a good scene. No, don't change that. That's good. And you realize you're defending it, so it can't be that bad. But up until then, I'm a fraud. I wrote my last funny line that people are going to discover. I don't know how I did that last movie that was somehow popular. It must have been everyone else who worked on it. Couldn't have been me. And all that sort of negative self-talk, it doesn't help. I'm also a recovering alcoholic, and one of the features of being an alcoholic is negative self-talk. That's why you start drinking, is to kill off the alcoholic mind that's already giving you that negativity and that fraud talk. An alcoholic doesn't wake up in the morning normally and say, hello, gorgeous, it's going to be a wonderful day. Hey, get out of bed, rub your hands together because we're going to have so much fun and creativity. No, you wake up and the minute you open your eyes, the voice in your ear says, hey, asshole, you awake again? Another chance to screw up. Come on, get out of bed. Try to tell yourself it's a good day. I'll be laughing. It's the negative voice that's always talking. So much of Kiss Kiss Bang Bang was just trying to outwit the negative voice, that when I would keep failing to make it work, it would come in and say, give up. You're done. You haven't worked in 5 years. Now you're trying to work and you're making a bollocks of it. Just stop. Admit you're a fraud. And I just kept writing, kept trying different things. It's amazing how far you can fall or how low you can go on a project that will eventually be successful. At one point in the working of it, the writing of it, you can be so low that you think you're an absolute piece of garbage who will never work again. As you're typing the stuff that eventually will morph into something successful. That is, to me, the true crisis of writing that everyone sort of needs to be alert to, because I have friends who they take a writing assignment. Oh, great! I'll do that between January and February, and then I'll take on another. They sit down, and it's like they pluck ideas out of the air. And what's wrong with you? How can people just sit down and start typing and just go, "I got this"? Now, having said that, every fraud, every person who kicks themselves, every person who agonizes over writing, at some point it kicks in. And you say, I got this. But it's very rare that it does. And when it does, you fly. When that moment comes where you're channeling the subconscious, you go, oh, this idea. No, this will work. How do we solve this problem? This will work. That's where you want to get to. But you have to slog through the swamp of fraud and self-doubt before you get to the shore where all those ideas are thriving and firing in your brain. And now you don't doubt yourself. But boy, getting there is tough.
No doubt. I think you're speaking to the heart of every writer listening to us right now.
Well, yeah, maybe. But once again, I have friends who seem to just blithely go to the office, have a cup of coffee, write 10 pages, go home and just enjoy their family and not think about it. It's just work for them and they do it well. I don't know how they do that. I don't know how you write a few hours a day and go, great stuff. Time to go get dinner.
So it's a much more overwhelming experience for you, like all encompassing.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example. I think you'll recognize it. My entire career depended upon a keystroke. What I mean by that is I was writing my first script and I wrote a scene and gave it to my brother who I admired. He didn't like the scene. He thought it was sort of just harsh and distasteful for him. It's a horror movie. And I was crushed. My brother, who I idolized, who was also a writer, who'd written paperback novels, and I'd read growing up all the stuff he would write. He didn't like it, so I was crushed. The next day, I sat at my typewriter, and I said, "All right, well, look, don't give up just yet." Because, I said, "No, just give up. You can't do this. Look, you tried. You're all over the map. Your own brother thinks it's bad." And I just sat there at the typewriter with a finger poised over it, said, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. There's paper in the typewriter. It's a blank page. I can't face it. I don't want to do it. And I just typed something. So my finger was literally suspended over the typewriter. And I just go, fuck it. And I just hit the letter T. The sun, comes glancing through blah, blah, blah. The trees, the this, the that. A character trudges into frame, sits down, and oh God, I hate myself. He says this isn't working. Why am I even typing still? Give up. And then he says this, and this guy comes in, and they talk. I'll just write some bullshit dialogue because I'm bad at this. And then I wrote a line, and I said, wait, okay, so if he says that, oh, wait, if he said that, this character would, I get it. Maybe he says that, oh, it'd be funny if the two characters died. This, and all of a sudden, I had a scene because momentarily, in that instant, something became more attractive and interesting to my brain than my own fear. It was fear, hate, fraud. And then all of a sudden, something caught my attention, and my brain for a second was distracted enough to find it momentarily more interesting than just my own fear. And so that's what you live for. You start with fear, and then when you get to problem solving, you can't be solving a problem and afraid at the same time. So that one letter T that I typed that I didn't want to type, I just forced myself to keep typing. And then suddenly, in the midst of hatred and self-hatred and fear, something caught my attention. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And it, for the second, for that moment, my mind just said, we have to stop the fear for a second. We just saw a problem to solve. And that's what it is, replacing fear with problem solving and knowing not to panic during the fear and just keep going. So much of writing is getting out of your own way.
Yeah.
Is getting rid of the negative self-talk and just doing what on some level you suspect that you really can do, but your fear makes you wash it over. You're afraid to be found out. You're afraid to realize you're a fraud. So it's easier not to do it. Your brain will try to take you there. It will try to say, don't go there and find out you're no good. Stop now, and you still hold the sort of illusion that someday you can write a book. Yeah. Don't actually sit down and try it. Oh, because then you'll have to confront, oh, I can't. But if you don't do anything, you can harbor it as a fantasy. Someday I'll write a book.
Yeah.
Talk to someone who says, I have all these ideas. Someday I'm just going to write, put a desk in front of them. Oh, here you go. What? You just said you want to write a book. Well, here's a desk. Sit down. Here's some paper. No, not now. Well, why not now? No, someday I'm going to write a book. Well, here's a desk and a typewriter. No, not now. I can't do it now. Translation, you're never going to do it.
Mm-hmm. No, I remember when I came out of film school, I had this notion of directing a movie. I don't know what I was doing. I was walking around for someone to recognize my genius and throw money at me. I don't know exactly what was happening. And so, but it just wasn't happening. And it was kind of in my back pocket. I had this kind of note that I'm gonna direct a movie, and I just kept it there. And I had the exact same notion that you had, that as long as I don't do it and F it up, I'm okay. You know what I mean? Because I always have the option to go do it. But if I do it and F it up, then what the hell am I?
Yeah.
And that kept me from the process for quite some time. And then I was doing a corporate video for a client in North Carolina, and they didn't like something. I went and reshot some more stuff, and I fixed it. And they didn't like something else, and I re-edited something and fixed it. And then, they didn't like something else, I changed the music, and eventually they liked it. Okay.
Yeah.
And then it dawned on me, well, the notion was, what am I going to do if I take millions of dollars from somebody and make a film that sucks?
Right.
Well, I'm going to go reshoot some stuff, and I'm going to edit it, and I'm going to fix some things, and eventually it will hopefully not suck. And it was that realization, if you will, that allowed me to go out and raise money and make my first film. It was that kind of a thought process. But you know what? Now that you mention it, it was anger over fear. My first credit was a movie. Do you know who Kal Penn is? He's Kumar from the Harold and Kumar movie. It's a movie he was in called The Arrangement. It's a romantic comedy about two Indian families forcing their American-born Indian children to arranged marriage. Okay.
Sure.
Being an Indian, it's especially hard going into the arts because, we're all doctors, lawyers, and engineers and business people. And my first movie that I wrote that got sold, I got a nice paycheck for it. I put a down payment on a house kind of thing. And they cast people from India that my parents knew. Oh, he was in that movie and he was in this. And
wow, that must have been. Yeah,
it was magnificent. It was all of a sudden, I'm just, this whole notion of doing what I'm doing is justified by my parents. Like, oh, he's going to do this for real. Oh, okay, this is, And then a few months after they filmed it, I checked the IMDb, and I'm not listed as a writer anymore. I co-wrote it with my dear friend Tommy Lambeth, and we're not listed as writers anymore.
Why?
Well, we don't know. The person who's listed, we've never heard of. Now, the movie doesn't come out for like over a year, so we never get to see it. And eventually, when we see it, we see that they took stuff out of our movie, like the artistic stuff and the stuff that's most supposed to make you feel things, because they didn't,
Right.
they didn't get that. But they didn't add anything. And so later on, and this is just an assumption, the producer was listed as at one point was listed as a screenwriter, then a made up name became on there, and then we threatened to sue, and now we're listed as story consultants. But I was so angry about losing my one IMDb credit that legitimized me in my parents' eyes. I went out and raised money and made my own movie. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what you're talking is about. That fear gets put aside by creating something, building something, a different emotion, and allows you to move forward. That was a big moment for me.
It's those galvanizing moments. And you'll see it emerge as a sort of staple in the scripts too. The idea in the story of a character is knocked down and finds various strategies and reasons to get up again.
Mm-hmm.
So much of writing is about a character getting hit and knocked down, and how, using what process and under what justification do they find a way to stand up again. And it's mirrored by the screenwriting process, because yeah, you will be knocked down, and sometimes, I'm lucky that it's not like I've ever been just completely shoved off a project. I mean, well, there was one where I didn't really matter whether I showed up at work or not, because yeah. At the same time, there's a whole other aspect of screenwriting which I hesitate to even invoke, because hopefully people don't have to deal with it. And that's the idea that once you write something well, now you have to have the strategies of getting through the studio. And there's all these ways to have meetings where you keep what you want. There's tricks like, you praise this guy, or if someone says an idea that's close to your idea, you immediately go yes to that person like it's his idea. And you go, I can do that. When meanwhile, that's what you wanted to do all along. There's all these tricks. And it's sad that you have to use tricks, because navigating studios and petty, jealous producers, or people who subtly inside know they don't have talent, but on the surface they have to pretend they do. So they swagger. And the swaggering people are tough to get by, because it's an admission that you may be right and they may have miscalculated is an ego blow to them that is unacceptable.
Right.
So you have to find ways to salvage the ego of the person and still get what you want.
Yeah.
It's maddening.
Yeah. In the corporate world, again, this is where I worked for a long time differently than you did. We would always have to pitch 3 ideas, and we would come up with 2 of the worst ideas we could possibly come up with, and then one
Right.
really good idea, because clearly they're always going to pick the great idea. No, they will pick the worst ideas. And it's like,
yeah, the bay window principle doesn't always work. There's a famous architect who knew his client hated bay windows, so he'd always put in bay windows so his client would have something to point to and change, and ignore something else that he might otherwise have messed with.
Yep.
But sometimes if you put in too many bay windows, they go, this is bad. Why did you put all these windows in here? It's an odd process, man. It's impossible to believe that it's been 35 years of doing this, and for you it's been significantly less, but but your eyes have more luster than mine, so I think you have yet to quite reach the same degree of tragic disappointment.
Okay, so you said it's been over 30 years. Do you still struggle with the same stuff you struggled with 30 years ago, or do you have new and more exciting stuff that you struggle with?
No, it's always the same, because you think with each successive script it would start to get easier. But in fact, the more you see of all the pitfalls, and the more jaded you become about using something that may have seemed fresh and bright and inventive to you before, now it doesn't seem that way. You want to get better. You want to move on. It always gets harder. And it's always the same for me, the same feelings of, was the last one the last one? And Still feel that way. I don't know. I'm working on something now with a couple writing partners, and once again, I still feel fraudulent. Still feel like I'm missing the boat, but you just keep trudging forward, and you do the work, and it doesn't matter what you think of yourself. If you just keep doing the work, then something will eventually get done. But no, it's all the same wrestles. It's all the same problems, except more difficult with each successive script. I know that doesn't really bode well or sound like a great endorsement for the screenwriting process, but it truly is a case that the next one doesn't get easier. The next one's probably going to be harder. There are certain things you'll manage. There's certain things that you do, the advantages you do get from having done more, having had a career, is when it feels bad, you learn maybe not to panic, because you know that you've been this way before and it worked out. So you have that advantage of not just freaking the fuck out every time you feel a twinge of fear. But you're still contending with the same problems and the same fears. It's just, and they do become powerful and progressively more hard to overcome. So all that you have really is this leap of faith that you can do it, that might not have been as available to you when you started out. The leap of faith then was based on ignorance. You didn't know it was impossible because no one told you that, so you do it anyway. But now the leap of faith is based on, I've done this and got through it before, I'll probably get through it again.
When you're working on a project, how do you know when you have a hold of it? What is it about a story or an idea or a nugget that goes, okay, this is a movie for you?
There are a lot of people who will say the answer to that question is the high concept, right? High concept is an idea like that you could pitch in a sentence, yell across a parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really pitch terms of endearment across a parking lot. It's this sort of a story, say it's a Southern story, but it's about relationships and this sort of enduring love and contentiousness between a mother and daughter, but at the same time, there's this astronaut character. It's hard to corral it into a sentence that sums it up. Whereas most people think if they can have a high concept, Freaky Friday, a mother and daughter exchange bodies, right. Well, you can say that across a parking lot. You can yell it to a friend and they'll go, oh yeah, that's a cool idea. The problem is, high concepts are kind of hard to come by, and they're also fraught with risk, because if you truly come up with a high concept, by the time you write it, try to sell it, someone else might come up with it. I had some friends who did something they did a real-time thriller, which means the movie actually took an hour and 50 minutes, and the story takes place in an hour and 50 minutes. You see everything, and they had this arrange it so that even traveling became interesting from one place to another, because they didn't want to violate the rules of real time. Then 24 came out, and it's like, oh, now the most popular show in America is real-time thriller. So they're not unique anymore. High concepts are risky because you risk the fact that everyone's looking for them. Better to have a story that has a concept, has a shape, but maybe, to me, is not as simple as, Die Hard in an amusement park. For a while, there was like, let's do Die Hard on a ship.
Let me ask you a quick question, because you're known for your Christmas movies. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
Of course. It's as evocative of Christmas, even more so in my mind, than some of the ostensibly Christmas-related movies. It's funny, my mom likes these Hallmark movies, these Christmas movies. There's so many, there must be hundreds. And a friend of mine just last week was watching a Hallmark movie, fell asleep, woke up and kept watching, and didn't realize they were now watching a different movie. Ended while they were asleep, but they started a new one, and it was just sitting there going, oh, whatever. He didn't even know that they changed movies on it. So
that's hilarious. So speaking of Christmas, there are all these Shane Blackisms, these tropes I'm sure you've heard about a million times, and Christmas is one of them. What is it about Christmas that makes you want to.
Christmas is just the perfect backdrop for some reason. It frames a story in a way that Christmas is sort of a character lurking in the background. The first time I saw it work successfully was in 3 Days of the Condor, where for some reason this violent CIA thriller, it's set in New York City, is framed by this hush of snow and this bustle of people walking by that have no idea what our protagonist is going through. And Christmas is a reflective time. It's a time of retrospection when we look back on our lives and take stock of where we've been and how we got here. And that is the essence to me of drama, is finding the most important point in a character's life. In the TV show, they're coming back next week. So this is just an episode. There'll be another one just as important next week. But in a film, in a feature, you want to come in at the most important time. You know, we're filming this because this is the story that happened to that character, which of all the events of their lives pretty much deserves to be filmed. It's the most important one. And at Christmas, emotions are accentuated, and you do tend to be at sort of crossroads where you take stock, where your whole life is sort of spread out in front of you for examination, like a watch on a table that's been disassembled. Lonely people are lonelier at Christmas. Mm-hmm. You know, happy people are happier. So Christmas becomes a sort of amphitheater in a way, an arena in which, you know, spiritual topics and religious themes are contrasted with the harshness of snow, cold, bitterness, loneliness. You know, wandering in, I've had wonderful experiences wandering into a church on Christmas, empty, and just sitting and thinking. You know, there was a wonderful episode of Dragnet, the old TV show, where they're talking to a priest and the church has been robbed, and the door is open so that thieves can come right inside. And Sergeant Friday says, "No, aren't you concerned? I mean, how can you do that? Leave the door open for anybody to come in, thieves, murderers, killers, you know." And he goes, "Especially thieves, murderers, and killers," says the priest. and yeah, it's the contrast of people who are snapped out of the weeds of normal life and forced to sort of look at the bigger picture. And that's what, to me, movies are. It's being snapped out of the weeds, and the one event that forces them to stop just living day to day. That's what Hallmark movies are. There's someone who's caught up in a life, a banal life, and they're always in the weeds of delivering papers and signing things and opining to their boss. And then one Christmas, they take a step back and they realize there's more to life. Christmas is a great time to realize there's more to life. It's also beautiful cinematically, and there's so many ways to find little bits of Christmas, even in a sun-blinded city like Los Angeles. You have to dig to find Christmas, to find that little promise of, you know, the magic that exists even in little sparkles, even in little bits. I remember I was telling the story of walking one night in the dark in Los Angeles and seeing this wind was blowing, and I saw this line swaying of Christmas lights, and there was this one broken plastic Madonna, this Virgin Mary with a light bulb inside it flickering. And I just stood there in the dark staring at that one little lonely light bulb on the street corner. I thought, that's in its way as powerful a beacon, as impressive a symbol of Christmas as the 40-foot tall Christmas tree on the White House lawn, this little lonely Madonna swinging in the middle of the night. And those kinds of images come to me at Christmas in ways that other things don't. So there's a lot of reasons why I use Christmas, but it just holds a certain filmic magic for me. It has for a long time.
Do you still work on spec scripts, or do you mostly do stuff for hire now?
I'd rather work on a spec script. The idea is to get to a place where I can direct something, and often it's easier to direct something that someone's ready to make. They want a script, they're excited, they're going to pay for it. Jumping onto a project that's already sort of on the rails is probably a more surefire way of getting to the directing part. Mm-hmm. And there's more of a risk in sort of starting at the very beginning with the word "the," and then just having the leap of faith that 2 years later there'll be a finished movie produced by a studio.
Right.
That's a big leap of faith, but it's worth taking, and I've done it.
Mm-hmm.
I've started with nothing, There were points where I slid off the map. I took Kiss Kiss Bang Bang to various studios, and people just made the most egregious suggestions and changes. They didn't like it. An old friend of mine, I took it to her, and she said, "Yeah, it's just misogynist because women die." And there were all these excuses why no one wanted to do Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. And to the point where the only guy, Joel Silver, who had the faith in the project and saw it as a kind of 48 hours type buddy movie, where instead of the black and the white guy, you had the gay and the straight guy.
Right.
And he said, that's cool. I'll do that for a budget, but yeah, I'll do that. And so I have a big debt of gratitude in a way to Joel Silver for having, at least in the midst of the height of his career at the time, he was doing giant Matrix movies, said, yeah, let's do this little movie because I like the premise and I think the writing has some spark to it. So easy, so hard, so easy to imagine getting a movie made and so many obstacles to actually getting there. It's a wonder any film gets made.
I work in a much smaller budget range on films than you do. Have you ever considered making a movie for $100,000 or $500,000 or anything like that, or do you prefer doing studio stuff?
500 grand is too little to me because I don't usually like movies that take place, for instance, in a house. I like things that have a little more scale.
Right.
Also, even if for 500 grand, you can't hire a cinematographer that will often do the justice that you want. Right. You want someone who makes it a painting, someone who makes it even bleakly beautiful.
Right.
And for 500 grand, there's a lot of run and gun. You get movies like Paranormal Activity, which are interesting and fascinating and good movies, but they exist because there's no DP, because it's a video camera.
Right.
And for $500,000, if you want it to look pretty, you really have to kind of stay in one location and just do that up. It's hard to just jump all over and make it look beautiful because the budget of moving a complete set and hiring a great DP just isn't there.
Let's go to the opposite extreme. When you worked on Iron Man 3, big budget, but lots of studio, I don't want to say control, but a lot of stuff that they have to do because you're part of a bigger universe. Yeah. How is it working in that scenario for you?
Well, the plus there, that can either be a death sentence for someone who ends up being constantly frustrated and suicidal, or it can be a magical experience where you see resources come to your aid. And the difference is who's the guy holding the money, who's the producer. And Kevin Feige, although we somehow sometimes knock heads, I knew that he ultimately had the say, but I like to think that we had a good conversation, and he's brilliant. That's the difference. He's good. And if you work with bean counters and, people who sit behind a desk and think that a career in Hollywood consists of multiple meetings with people and not really any creative digging, they never get down and get in the weeds. Kevin always gets down and gets in the weeds. Back then, he was there breaking story on every movie. How does he do it? How does he not take vacations? I just remember thinking he's going to keel over at some point because he gets so involved on such a, and once again, if it's a bad producer, you call it micromanaging. If it's a good producer, you call it help. So Kevin was just, and Stephen Broussard and Victoria Alonso and Lou D'Esposito, those were people that you get angry at from time to time, feel like you're looking over your shoulder, but ultimately they're so smart that they help the movie. I can imagine doing a big budget movie with a guy who runs over you and just changes things and his ideas aren't good, and that would be a disaster. I didn't have that problem. Awesome. I worked with really smart and good people.
I always wanted to ask you about the sequence in Iron Man 3 where he ends up in the small town with the boy. What was the idea behind that whole sequence?
It was sort of a Christmas Carol episode.
Yeah.
We take Tony Stark out of the Iron Man suit that he's tinkered with, which to him, all these different suits are just him tinkering with his own brain in various forms, trying out this suit. He can inhabit that for a while. Then he steps out and steps into this suit and tries that out. But he's really just tinkering with himself. These are all like lined up mechanical copies of himself, and he inhabits them variously. The problem is, by the time we make this movie, he's more comfortable inhabiting those than stepping out. So what better than to put him without a suit in the middle of nowhere, dealing with a young Tony Stark, who he has to give advice to. You know, it's the kind of it was truly the Christmas Carol part of that movie. Also, Robert just has this great attitude around kids. He doesn't coddle them, and we knew it would work. There's a line that's so brilliant that was part of Robert, where the kid's telling him a story. Yeah, my dad went out for cigarettes. You know, I guess we went out for scratchers. I guess he must have won because that was 2 years ago. Haven't seen him. You know, Robert said, "Yeah, Dad's leave. That happens. Don't be a pussy about it." So anyway, here's what I need. And a lot of people have said, "You can't do that," but we knew it would work because it was Robert. And Tony Stark, with that attitude, dealing with a young kid who is upset but fires back, who gives as good as he gets. What is it? Gives as good as he gets, or whatever the phrase is.
Mm-hmm.
We just knew that would be magic once you put Robert together with that kid.
Yeah, I remember, like, there's a restaurant scene where he's fighting the bad guy, but he doesn't have a suit and he's holding things up and using his brain and using everything around him. So I don't know, that sequence has always stuck out to me. And
well, there's always the idea that Robert would you confront Tony, you set up a situation where he's only comfortable inside the suit. In fact, he has anxiety attacks outside it. Then you take him away. You know, he lands and the suit is broken. It needs to repair itself. And so in the meantime, he has nowhere to go, wanders through the snow into a small town and has to use his wits and confront the idea of just completely reassessing. And ultimately, when he's about to give up and having his panic attack, his little kid is the one who gets him back on his feet. We talk about various ways characters knocked down and what the reason is or the process by which they manage to stand up again. In this case, the kid says, "Wait, you're a mechanic, right?" At the basic, because as a joke, you said, "Yeah, look, I'm just a mechanic, kid." Because, well, if you're a mechanic, fucking build something.
yeah.
And so he stands up and goes, "Yeah, okay." And he uses primitive technology, but he goes back to work building things like he did probably when he was a teenager and didn't have access to millions of dollars. He just builds things. That's what he does. And so it was so much fun to work on that and to see Robert be the central part rather than the special effect be the central part.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it's interesting how, and I think this is true for a lot of Marvel movies, there's just this emotional core to them that exists, that doesn't exist in a lot of other superhero or large budgeted action movies. And that was something that really stuck out to me. So what are you working on these days? Are you allowed to talk about anything, or
Yeah, no, I'm allowed to mention certainly that right now we're trying to adapt a series of wonderful books written under the name Richard Stark. The author is actually one of my old favorites, Donald E. Westlake. Donald Westlake is a sort of a legend in the crime writing field. He's the one other crime writers talk about. You know, he's the sort of desert island guy for a lot of people who write mysteries and crime stories. And these books are about a career thief named Parker. And he's been variously played through the years by Lee Marvin in a movie called Point Blank. Mel Gibson did a version of him in Payback. Robert Duvall played him in The Outfit. All various stabs at catching the magic in a bottle that somehow in the book form this guy does. The Parker books are, it's like going to school. They're primers for that type of tough guy story. They're also just odd and unique, and there's a tone there that if you get it right, you don't find it a lot of places. So we're trying to do our stab at the Parker movie. Hopefully, I mean, I'm working on it with Team Downey, and the best idea would be to get Robert's take, to show him as this character and what he can do with it, and what we together can do based on the evidence of all these old movies. Yeah, they each had their benefits. They each had their things where they didn't quite scrape it enough. So here's our chance to scrape that platonic shape. The perfect Parker movie, which already exists out there. People have taken shots at it, and they've gotten bits of it. Now it's our turn to try to chip away everything that doesn't look like a Parker movie until what's left is that platonic ideal, and scrape as much of it as we can, because we've got the best actor. He's waiting on our script. So let's see what happens.
Do you adapt one of the books, or do you combine them, or how do you approach that?
You look at all of them and you've got to find one story that incorporates the various best elements and sort of sums up the essence of it. And also, I think it's a mistake in a series of 24 books about various crimes. Choosing one often doesn't get all the juice. We had to come up with something that would, it's our best effort of culling from all 24 books a feeling, a sensitivity, a tone, and ultimately a crime that's slightly bigger than any of the ones in a single book. So let's see what happens.
Okay, that's exciting. Now, do you work on one project at a time, or
I tend to. I'm okay. I'm okay to supervise one and work on some. It's hard for me to write two things at the same time, especially if they're both thrillers or crime or tough guys or something like that, because it's too much crime, too much tough. I think the only way I could really probably work on two things at once is if one were radically different from the other. True crime would be writing things where things became interchangeable and could exist in both movies. Everything I write, the idea is that this one has to be this, and you can't just take scenes out of it and put it somewhere else. So it's easier when I'm working on something to not do a similar thing. And I'm blessed, truly blessed, to have been given the opportunity, as long as I have, to remain to some extent relevant. Relevant meaning someone will still hire me to do this. Mm-hmm. I still feel like a fraud when I'm not working or when I'm working badly. I still have the same issues and problems and doubts and bits of negative self-talk that I will always have. But hopefully, you know, people like you, talking to you, I hear myself say things I need to hear. I hear myself tell you things I didn't know I knew. And that's the benefit of being on a podcast like this or teaching. You find yourself in front of your students saying things that you need to hear that you didn't know you knew.
Yep, 100%. Yeah.
That's the basis of it.
So through 30 years of experience, I'm sure you've had a number of moments where you figured something out about your process. Can you just share one thing that maybe might help one of our listeners get through a project of theirs?
There's the spiritual aspect of it, where you just have to sort of give yourself to the task of overcoming fear and doing all those things. Writing is a battle against yourself and trying to relax enough to let your brain tell you what it wants to see. We've been through some of that just in today's talk. Mm-hmm. In terms of the actual skills, I would say, once again, pick up the one with the red and black cover, red and blue, dark blue, whatever it is, of William Goldman's Adventures in the Screencake, because he talks about the specifics of reversals, setups and payoffs, the actual things that become part of your writing vocabulary that your mind knows to now use to get to the emotion. There's the things you need to say, and there's the physical mechanisms and tricks by which it becomes easier to just stack them in a script. And Goldman will provide that. Maybe if I had another podcast, I would go into that part, the actual constructing and structure part. But for the lack of it today, I would say, as you leave here, if you have a chance to get that book, do that. Also, if you're wanting to start a screenplay, here's a bit of advice. You don't have to know everything. You have to get 4 really good screenplays. Try William Goldman, try Jim Brooks, try Walter Hill. Look at the different styles and stories, and that'll teach you what you need to know. It's not that much of a structured thing. If you're inside, you say interior. If you're outside, you say exterior. Right. Is it day? Is it night? Give us a general idea of what the scene's supposed to feel like. Don't just, ramble about events. Try to not have big blocks of text because no one likes to read those. Don't wax on like a novelist when you're writing something as to a studio executive as disposable as a screenplay. They have to read 7 a week. If they can't get through it, if you can't hook them, they're going to toss it across the room and go on to the next one. But again, to be continued in terms of maybe talk about the day-to-day grind of structuring. In the meantime, check out William Goldman's book.
Well, Shane, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy man, got a lot going on, and I know a lot of people are getting a lot out of this podcast. And yes, I will take you up on that. At some point, maybe next year, we'll get another podcast. But until then, thank you so much, my friend.
And thank you for for giving me the opportunity. It truly is a pleasure, and I'm always happy to see you at the film festivals and what have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for watching this video, and as a small token of my appreciation, I want to offer you a free video course on how to outline your screenplay. I normally charge $299 for this course, but for a limited time, it is free. Now, it is a 5-day course, but I'm giving you 7 days to finish this outline, okay? After 7 days, that course goes away. So if you're not dedicated and you don't want to knock out a killer outline for your screenplay, don't do it. But if you do, click the link below. I can't wait to hear how you like it.